Yo guys, today I'm gonna show you how I made my track The Moment. I have the project here with me and I thought it would be cool to show you how I made it, what my workflow is, how I mix tracks. This is the first time I'm doing this, so please forgive me if I forget something, but I try to show you as much as possible. I think it's best to start with to highlight some of the key parts of this track in case you didn't hear it fully. So you have an idea what the song is about, how it sounds, and then I'm just gonna start with the top with the vocals and show you the full project. So let me play you the first drop now. Like when we go, oh no, I'm ghost. And let me play you drop number 2. Like when we go, oh no, I'm ghost. To the world went cold and I saw went frozen. When the odds got bent, all that I've been golden. Like when we go, oh no, I'm ghost. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. To the world went cold and I saw went frozen. When the odds got bent, all that I've been golden. Like where did we go? Oh no, I'm ghost. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. To the world. Yeah, so that are the most important parts of the track. Let me start at the top of the project and show you the vocal. The vocals are done by Anyma, who is a really talented rapper and spoken word artist. He did some big tracks, including Kevin DeVries' Born Like That, a track that I really love. So he sent me the vocals in this case, and I just started building around the vocals. But the vocals that he sent were already pretty good, and I didn't need to do much processing. Normally I can show you, I use the Xvox Pro, which is a really easy and good plugin to fast process vocals, is this plugin. But in this case, I didn't need to do much processing. What I only did is some reverb and some delay. And other than that, it's just automation. So I can play the vocal solo and show you how it sounds without the reverb and delay that I added. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. So it stops immediately, so that's why I want to have a bit of a reverb and delay too. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. Yeah, and other than that, on this vocal, I didn't do much processing on this one. And obviously I wanted to build the track around the vocal, but I didn't want the vocal to be too prominent in the track. So what I did is to do some vocal chops here and there. So I have this. Ghost, ghost, ghost. I cut out the word A and I added it in the track. I have some atmos of the vocal. And maybe this is a good thing to show you because I use a lot for atmos sounds to spaced out. It's an echo and a reverb, and it makes your sound go really to the back of your track, so really fake, so it has a lot of reverb and stuff. So on this one I used that one, and I used some EQing to get rid of the lows and get rid of the highs to keep a bit of the room for the main vocal. Let me A/B it for you. It's not really special, but then you can hear how it sounds. So that's what I did, and after that I did some volume automation, some filter automation. Yeah, that's for the spoken vocal. That's it, what I did. I also have a singing vocal, which I have mainly in the intro and the outro of the first drop. And what I sometimes do when the track is finished, I put it in Suno and I just check what kind of weird sounds or cool melodies it makes on the melodies I already made. So I put it in Suno, and Suno added a singing vocal, which I really like. So let me play it for you without the effects first. Which was really cool, and then I added a transgate, which makes it more gatey. And then again I added the spaced out to create more reverb effect and to put it more to the background. So in total it would sound like this. Also, I added a track spacer. I do this a lot with elements that are fighting for room with a vocal. In this case, I put the main vocal as input and I did the mix to 12.5%, not too much. What I do with vocals is put the attack and the release like really fast. So like every time that the main vocal is playing, so immediately the sound that I want to be ducked is ducking. If you have to attack a bit higher, it takes a little bit more time for it to be ducked. Let's go to the kick and bass then. I have a group, as you can see, but like let me end with the group, what I did on the group, and let me start with the kick. This is the kick that I used. And I used 2 kicks because like I had one main kick and I used that kick like for a long time in the project, but like I think in the end of the mixing I missed that extra punch in the kick. And first I tried to get the punch a bit more by adding a transient shaper, so the transients are a bit more prominent, but I thought it needed more and I put it on the main group also, like some transient shaping in the lows. And I added a bit of lows with the EQ, and I got rid of the mids in the kick to have it a bit more clean. Let me play it without the effects first and then gradually put them back on. So when it's a tiny difference, but when I add the effects back on, the kick is a bit more mature, I would say. And then I added like a low layer to the kick as well. I filter it a lot to only have like the low of the kick. And this one is really interesting. I use this a lot to have a good mix and to have a mix that you can like limit a lot without like distortion. Your phase has to be like really good. And the phase, like if you don't know what it is, like please search for it on the internet. It's like too long for me to explain now. So what I did on this one, because low is like a tricky one, especially with phase, I put on a fuser, and a fuser is normally like a sidechain plugin, but it also has a function where you can put something in phase. And I routed the main kick into the sidechain, and then I used the automatic phasing button to phase it with the kick. Don't tell me I'm next, so here you can see how it works. To the world went cold and I saw. Then we're going to the bass, and the bass in this case, I remembered I made the bass first with a MIDI track, but I didn't like the sound that much. And sometimes if I don't like the sound that much, I go for audio samples. And I got a loop and I cut the loop into the same rhythm as I made with the MIDI. And this was the first loop that I cut it, and it sounds like this. But as you can hear, it's really low and it didn't have like mid. So I added like 2 extra layers to create like more the mid in the bass. And with this one, because the plug bass 2, because it has like lows as well, I also did the same trick as I did with the kick. I routed the main sub, in this case, to the fuser plugin, and I put it in phase with the main sub. Other than that, like on the channels, I didn't do too much. It's like a kickstart to have some sidechain with the kick. I did it individually on this one, because sometimes if you put it on the group and you have like a fuser or other effects, then you could end up with the problem that you have like latency issues. So let me show you what I did on the main group of the bass, which is a bit more interesting. I first used the Soothe to clean up the bass. I used the demudding preset a lot, and it cleans out like the low frequencies of the bass and makes your bass more clean. Then I got a Pure EQ, and I used this one a lot on synths and bass because like it's based on an AI algorithm. And what it does, it has like a database of like tracks that are in my style or in the dance style, and it listens to your bass and it compares it with the reference it has, and then it makes an EQ profile. I don't know exactly how it works, but like 90% of the time it makes your bass more warmer and more low end, and in this case I wanted to achieve that with this plugin, so that's why I used it. So let me A/B for you with this one. And as you can hear, it has like a bit more low mids and a bit more lows to have a warmer bass. Then I use the Pro MB, and this is a trick I do a lot with bass. So what I normally do is like make a band around 150, 120, and I do the attack a bit slower and the release to have like a bit slower compressor. And then I compress like the low part of the bass. The The problem is if you do this, the volume also goes down. So what I do is like I put the band level like back up to the original level that it was. So your bass is still the same level. The next plugin is the Puke Tech, and what I like about this is that you can boost, but you can also attenuate. And attenuate is like you make a cut above the place where you're boosted, and in most cases with bass you get like a really clean bass because you add like some low, but you also clean out like the more muddy mid in this one. And I can show you with a different plugin what it does that's more visual. It does like basically the same. Like this plugin visualizes what it does, and it has only one knob, so it automatically attenuates. So if I boost to low, you can see it makes a dip around here, and that's exactly what the Puke Child does. Only I can fill in the value of the attenuation, and with this one it's automatically. After that I put like a compressor on it to compress everything of the bass. Doesn't do a lot, just like -2 reduction, but it makes the bass more glued. After that I added a track spacer because I felt the leads I used in the first drop were fighting with the bass. I will show the leads later, but the leads sounds like this. And after that I put some reverb on the bass to make it a bit more stereo and a bit more wide. To glue the kick and the bass together I use the group, and I don't do this in every track, but like when I feel it's needed, because like a lot of times when I do this the kick is like going down a lot and it doesn't have the punch that I want it to have. But in this case I thought it sounded really cool, and I used the Shadow Hills Opto Max for this one, and it's a slow compressor. It's similar to the CLA 2A, and it's really good for gluing stuff together. So this is without. And you can feel the kick and bass are becoming more on the same level, which makes it more glued and sound more mixed. Next are the drums, and the drums are not too special. Like mainly for drums I use like loops and samples because they are easy to use, they sound good. Sometimes I layer them, sometimes I don't. In this case I didn't layer them, but I processed them a bit. This is the clap I used. And on the clap I used some transient shaping. Let me turn it off and on. So you can hear that the clap is a bit more tight. So let me show you the plugin. The sustain is a bit down and the attack is a bit higher. So it makes the clap like really punchy and cut through the mix. And I do this a lot with my claps and snares because this way it doesn't take too much room in the mix, but it's really snappy and it cuts through the mix. I also did a tiny bit of EQing and low end removal to get a cleaner mix. And as you can see, like a really tiny bit of a high shelf. Let me A/B it for you. So as you can hear, not much, but like a tiny bit. And again, I use the fuser because like a kick is like the main element in the dance track. So I face everything to the kick. So in this case, I face the clap to the kick, and the clap is the same phase as the kick. What I also did is use a standard clip, and normally I do this at the end of my mixing stage because some sounds has like more transient than others, and like drums especially has like really high transient, and you want to get rid of the unnecessary transients because it fucks with your limiter. If you have a lot of transients, your limiter will work harder and your compressor will work harder as well, and it will do unnecessary things and you can get like distortion more earlier. So what I did like is a tiny reduction with the clipper of -1 dB. So every time it reached the -1 dB threshold, it cuts away the frequencies above. And to end the clap chain, I used a harsh snare clap preset by Sooth, and this is just to clean up the clap a bit because it has some like harsh frequencies that I want to get rid of. So this is off, and this is on. Then we're going to the hi-hats, and as you can see I put it in a group and I glued them together, and I will show you later what I did on that group. But like normally I would also add the clap into this group, but in this case I didn't do it because in this mix I really want to have the clap like cutting through the mix, and when I glued it with the hi-hats together it was too much the same level and the clap wasn't cutting through the mix. So that's why I choose in this case to only glue the hi-hats together. And this is the top hi-hat that I used. It's from the Camel Fat sample pack, and I really like that pack. It has like really good drum sounds. And let me put like all the effects off and show you what I did. Because like this drum loop is really good, but like in my opinion for this track, it was a bit too thin. So what I did with this one, I added some texture. And here I did it again because this texture I will show you later, I automate. And with this, the hi-hats get a bit more dirtier, but also a bit more mid, which I wanted in this case. And I added a fresh air, and the fresh air adds some high frequencies, like really airy frequencies, so your hi-hats get more bright. And what I did on the automation with the texture, as you can see, I did this to create some movement in my hi-hat, so I can play you how it sounds. So it's cool to have like a bit of movement in the hi-hats. And I added like an open hi-hat to this loop to create a bit more energy. I put some transient shaping on this one, just a tiny reduction of the sustain so the hi-hat is a bit more shorter and less prominent in the mix. And I put a reverb on it. Then I made a group and I glued the hi-hats together with the glue. Just a tiny bit, as you can see. I can A-B it. Not much, but it does a little bit of gluing. Then I again did a standard clip to get rid of the peaks of the hi-hat. Also a really tiny bit. I EQ'd the hi-hats a bit. I got rid of the low end. And again, I put a soot on it to get rid of the harsh frequencies. And I used the preset harsh hi-hat for this one. This is off. This is on. So yeah, that were my drums. Like the other stuff, I don't think it's necessary to show you because it's just some fill things like a reverse crash and a fill. Also some build snare. Didn't do a lot, just like some automation. Then we go to the ARP. And the ARP are, in this case, I don't think it's really ARP. It's more like Atmos sounds that I used in this one. I used this one in the outro. And I really like to use like older synths because they're less predictable and they sound more organic. And I used in this one the Mini V by Arturia. And I processed it a bit again with the space out to create a bit more reverb. I also EQ'd it a bit. I got rid of the lows again to have a clean mix. And this is just automation. And it sounds like this in the outro. So this is a good thing to remember, like all those atmospheric sounds, like they might not sound prominent, but like if you A-B them, it's like a pretty big difference. I think atmospheric sounds make your track because they give character to your track, they give like a deeper layer to your track. So like if you make music, I think it's really important to add like those kind of things. And I also use this one, I didn't do a lot, it's just like a serum preset with the rhythm of the leads, and I did like this. Then we go to the main leads, and the main leads I used mostly in the second drop. What I really liked about this track is that it first drops like more chill and then it builds towards like a bigger drop, which gives it like a really progressive feeling. On this main lead I'm not too proud because like normally I would layer it and I would like create the sound a bit more original, but in this case I just used the Nexus preset. And I didn't do a lot with the Nexus preset, like this is the Nexus preset, and I just EQ'd it a bit. Have a little bit extra highs and fresh air to also add highs and pure Q again. And let me put them all off and show them how they sound individually. So this makes it a bit more brighter. This plugin makes it brighter a lot. So you have way more presence in your synth. And this one gives it a bit more warmth and a bit more high end. The other channels are just like the same sound but a different volume and different processing. So sometimes I use more reverb, sometimes I want to have it more bright. You can hear that really well in the first drop that I already implement the synth in the first drop to get listeners used to the sound. Don't tell me I'm next. So it's really filtered out. Then we go to the drop group. And I used some samples in here and some synth shots to get a bit more exciting things in the track. And this is the original loop I got from Splice. I used some Filter Freak, which makes more movement in the track and filters it. And I EQ'd it a bit, the low end and the high end again. What I also did with this one, that I stretched the sample a bit, so it sounds like this. How you do that is you put the sample on warp mode, you hold shift, and then you can like pull on it And if you hold Command, you can like do it without snapping to the grid. And then you can get like really cool effects like this. Also, I had some synth shots. This is just a sample. I didn't do much on it, just some low end removal. And I got the Mini V4 again, and I found this cool synth that I used in the track. Also a little bit of low end removal. And to show you how it sounds. So I think it's really cool to have like those synth shots because it really gives your track character. Then the main lead for the first drop, and I really love that one because it really shows my sound. I really like techy sounding sounds, and I really love the Nexus for that. And in this case I found an arpeggiator. And I just put like the MIDI that I already used for the synth in this preset, and it came out like this. I did a lot of processing on this one. Let me mute all of that so you can hear how it sounds. So first I got rid of the low end again. Then I did some filter freak again, and that characterized the sound a lot. Because without it would sound like this. So the filter freak creates like movement in the sound. Then I added a Decimort for a bit more high sounds. And to make it a bit more dirty. Then just some automation, some kickstart for sidechain, the pure EQ again to create a bit more warmth in the lead. For big reverbs, I really like this plugin. It's like a really big reverb sound. It sounds like this. Let me put it back on. Again, what I did with the second drop main lead is to create more channels and create different volumes and different effects. Then to the break sounds, and I used again a Suno sound, and I really like what Suno did with like creating some weird effects on my track. So I just got the stems and I pulled this out. And I just got rid of the low end a bit. Have some automation with Valhalla and delays. And other than that, I didn't do much on that sound. Some tiny effects like reverse synth in the break. This sounds really cool because it pushes it like into the second build up. Then I have a respace for some tension in the second build up. And when the build up progresses, you can see it has some like automation that the volume goes down. The effects, yeah, I'm not gonna show you all the effects because I don't think it's important. It's just some uplifters, some risers, some cool noise impacts. Okay, yeah, let me go to the mastering chain, what I did. So I start the mastering chain with the multi-amount dynamics, and in this case I did the amount pretty high. Normally I do it like between 2 and 5%. And I got this preset from an audio attend course with Cass Irvine from Wired Mastering, and I saw he used this on his master, and I really liked the sound of it, so I just copied the preset and I use it in my tracks as well. And let me A/B it for you how it sounds. So without it, it sounds like this. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. So a little bit more tight. Then I used the Shadow Hill mastering compressor to have it a bit more glued. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. It does like -1, -3 reduction, so not a lot. Then, and I use this often in my tracks, I find for a reference track in the same key, and I just put the Ozone Match EQ on the reference, and then I put it back on my master again, and I ask what the difference are, and then I just let it do its EQing, and it makes my track EQing wise more to the reference track. And in this case I only used everything under the 2K, because above 2K it was deducting too much. Let me A/B it for you. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. So it creates a bit more mids, low mids, and deducts the low end a bit. After that, I like this plugin as well. It's based on AI again. It's made by David Guetta and Nicky Romero, and it analyzes your mix, and with their algorithm it makes changes to your track. And I not always use everything that they change, but like in this case I really like the extra transient they added, the compression and the stereo image, and I muted the limiter and I muted the EQ because the EQ was, in my opinion, a bit too radical. Let me A/B it for you how it sounds. This is without. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. So the next plugin is the C4 by Waves, and I really like that plugin for bass. It's like really essential on my master chain to have like a glued bass, and mainly what I do like in the process making a track, I put the C4 and the multiband like almost from the beginning on my master chain already, and I produce the track into that master chain. I really like how that works, and it gives my track more like a tight low end from the beginning, which makes me more excited about the track. So let me A/B it for you what it does. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. So as you can hear, like it makes the low end much more tight, and I did the same trick as I did with the FabFilter multiband, which I showed you in the beginning of the tutorial. I compressed it and then I put the volume back on with the gain. After that I used the Soothe to have less mud on my master. Don't tell me I'm next up. And it just does a tiny bit, but it cleans out your mix more, which makes you able to make the track a bit more louder again. Then I did the standard clip on the whole master to get rid of even more peaks, and I do this before of my limiters, so it creates more room for my limiters, so the limiters won't work as hard. And after that, as you can see, I group this, and what I normally do, I make my first master and I send it to my producer friends, and I ask their feedback what they think should be better. And in this case I got the feedback that the track misses a bit presence, so what I added is a bit more 2.6K and 5.5K to have a bit more of the presence, and I added a fresh air to have like a bit more brightness in my mix. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. And to end the chain I use two limiters, and don't ask me why I used it, it's just like I think it sounds good and I can't explain you why, but it just gives me the feeling I can make my tracks more louder, even though probably it's not true, but I just like to work like this. And what I firstly do is to have like a maximizer by Ozone, and then I push the track as much as possible. And what I normally do is match the output gain to the input gain, so everything you do is on the same volume. And that's really important because your ears like louder sounds more than softer sounds, even if the sounds is worse. So that's why it's important to have like the same volume when you do adjustments to your track, so you don't trick yourself. And in this case I just pushed the gain all the way to the maximum level where the track is loud but it's not distorting, and that's in this case 14.3. And then after that I added Pro L to finish off the master, and I just pushed it like 0.2 extra. And I didn't do too much because I already limited, and if you do too much it's gonna distort, but like the 0.2 extra gives like just a tiny bit more loudness. And what I also do, I put on the true peak and I put it on 0.3, and that's make sure that the track is not clipping. And that's like basically my master chain. I did like some volume automation, which is important to have like impact on the drop. So what I do is put the volume a little bit down before the drop, and on the drop it's on 0 again, so the drop has more impact. And I also do the same sometimes with the low end. So yeah, I think I covered everything. I showed you the master chain, I showed you all the individual elements, and let me answer some questions of my fans as well. So the first question is from Smiles Official, and he asked me, how can I get record labels to accept my track? This is a good question, and it took me time to understand it, and also to have experience that my tracks have like the good quality to be accepted by labels. It's important to know that like a label is not only looking to the right track. Like there are some like niche labels, of course, that really are only there for the music, but like the more major labels, they also look to the profile of an artist. So if you have a really good track and not a big profile, they are less likely to sign it because your track will be less sellable. So like it's really important to have like, besides of good music, also like a good social media and a really cool and good brand around it to make you a sellable artist. The next question is by 333 Music, and he asked me, for this track, at what stage of the demo did you start communicating with the vocalist? And I was communicating with this vocalist for some time. And the funny thing with this track is that I sent him like a totally different track before, like a different demo. And I asked him, can you do something on this? And I did that because I didn't have this track yet. And I wanted to let him do his magic on something else. And I felt like, let's get his vocal and let's put it in a new project when I have it. So with this track, I started right away with the vocal, and that really inspires me to create like really fast track. So I was really happy that I had the vocal from the start in this case. The next question is by Joran. How did you create a low end, sub, mid bass and kick? This is all strung in your tracks. I showed it before in the tutorial, but like, let me dive a bit deeper in this, because I showed you guys like the phasing stuff of the bass, and that's really important to have like the phase the same as the kick to create like a really strong low end. Other things are using the right sound. So in this track I used some audio samples, because audio samples are already processed. They sound like really strong from the beginning. So it's really important to use the right sounds, and if you use audio samples, if you use presets, like it doesn't matter that much. It's like the most important is that the sound is good, and how you get it, it's not important to the people that listen to your track. What I really learned throughout my producer career is don't over process a bass. So sometimes I put like 10 of EQs on it, or like a decapitator, the other saturation, EQs, compression, and if you do it too much, you squash your bass and your bass is not there anymore. So find a really good sound of the bass and then just improve it a tiny bit with other plugins. So don't do it too much. Then I got another question from Imrex about the stereo width, how I did it in the track. And it's a good question. In this track, I didn't pay too much attention on it. Only the Faster Master plugin added some stereo width. Sometimes what I also do for stereo width is use an imager, and then you can make bands and you can boost the certain bands. And what is also like a cool plugin that makes also your track more stereo is the God Particle. And don't do the amount too much because it's also an EQ, but like normally I play with the amount between 60 and 80%. It creates some stereo width. Don't tell me I'm next, I was left in the moment. Cool, that were the questions that I had. I'm really happy to show you what I did. I hope that helped you in your production career. Please reach out to me if you have more questions. Reach out in the comments. I will answer them all in the comments, and I will make more stuff for you.